Let me present shortly, please. I'm doing ultramicrotomy since 1970. I have developed techniques for polishing diamond for making knives, and I have started teaching ultramicrotomy in 1980. You see the picture up left. In 1980, I was invited to a conference in Beijing, in China. And as you can see, I have also, my hair has changed in the meantime. The color has changed. This is, other than that, I'm still the same person. And let me go to the diamond knife. The diamond knife was introduced by Fernandez Moran in Venezuela in the 50s. He was using glass knives, and he realized that he was a neuroscientist, he wanted to have serial sections. And he developed, or he had his own diamond knives developed in his lab. And technicians who have done the diamond polishing then went back to Europe. And this is the history of our company. When Ruching asked me to present some cutting, she said, since your previous speaker is talking about bone, you should concentrate on cutting heart samples. And now I did this little presentation, and I wrote sectioning heart samples. Then I said, no, these samples are not heart. So I changed to sectioning brittle samples. And heart is something else. I mean, I'm used to work with hard materials like diamond, and then if it comes to biological material, it is not really hard, it is brittle. And that's what the situation when you section a ductile material like an epoxy resin. The sections are lifted up to the water surface and swim. They are stretched to a certain extent, not completely. There is compression left, but they are stretched. If the sample is brittle, like maybe the bone, at least the non-decalcified bone, the sample tends to break. Now, when the sections swim away from the knife on the water surface, the danger of damaging the knife is rather small. It becomes a problem. The diamond knife is very fragile. The radius curvature of a diamond knife is 2 to 4 nanometers only, making it extremely fragile. And it's not the hardness of a sample which destroys, it's the lateral force. And if you, for example, you need to section dry because your sample is sensitive to water, and you section dry and the sections are not swimming away, then it becomes a problem for the cutting edge. When the images I show here are, I cut sections and I remove the sample from the ultramicrotome. I go to an optical microscope and I see the surface. The surface of the sample is the replica of the last section. So I can detect a lot of problems by doing both cutting and optical microscopy. You see the radius curvature, and then the image left down. You see a sample surface of a sample which had some fairly brittle material, a fuel cell embedded in resin. And it's not the hardness of the fuel cell, it is the sample is pulled out, the small fragments are pulled out during the cutting process, and this causes the damage. Now, all the sample testing I'm doing are done on new knives. So when you see these lines in a vertical direction, this is all the damage from one single sample or from one section or a few sections. So the knife marks cannot be seen directly on a cutting edge in the optical microscope. I then cut sections again, maybe an empty resin block, and then the image on the right side, you see the sections cut at maybe 50 nanometers, they split, and this shows you the condition of the knife. For your own knives, if you do not know the damage of your sample done on the knife, unless you cut some sections with a pure resin block and then you see the section split, and then this portion of the knife edge is worn out. In a modern ultramicrotom like the Leica UC7, you have a measuring in the software. You can move the knife east-west, and you can, when you cut your sections, and Lee mentioned you should use an old knife. The problem with an old knife is you do not know whether the sample causes damage, because you have some damage already, and then you do not really know what happens. So, but at least when you use the measuring mode from the ultramicrotom, you measure first, you cut your sample small, you measure the part you have used from the edge, and then you know, okay, this part of the knife is maybe worn out. What we find in classical resin blocks, upper image, you see lines starting from small inclusions in the resin, and below you see a little dot, the dark dot in the tissue, and then starting here and then making a knife mark. It doesn't have to be a very hard inclusion. It's an inclusion, a brittle inclusion in a soft matrix. During the cutting process, it is removed, or at least loosened, and this causes the damage on the knife. This is terrible cells grown on sapphire discs. When I do these samples, I get immediate damage. Imagine this is a block face after cutting just a few sections, and these are all the lines are knife marks. Some you see bright dots starting a knife mark here. The approach of the sample block with the knife may be critical. I see 99% of ultramicrotomists moving the sample block up and down to see the light gap. This is all fine as long as the light gap is there. But if you touch the sample block with the knife and you move the sample block up, you have damage, then you have a lateral force. To the samples, no problem for the knife if the bone is decalcified. Really no problem at all. No damage ever seen with decalcified bone. I did some cutting of not decalcified bone you see the image, and the upper image is the sample block after the cutting in the optical microscope. The bone, this is the trimmed surface here. This part is the bone, and this is the hydroxyapatite. I really had no problem at all with this, but I have to admit, I do not always know about the samples. I do not get much information on samples. So I cannot tell you what type of hydroxyapatite it was. Was it an implant material? I just cut and I had no problem with it. But I do not say that hydroxyapatite will not cause damage. I cannot tell you this. I did some cutting on a mouse tooth. It was a young mouse, and I had no damage at all on the knife from this. This was cut on a 35-degree diamond knife. This is again the image in the optical microscope after the cutting. If there were damage, you would see lines. Dry kidney stone. I got the kidney stone from a research laboratory. I was asked to cut and to see whether it would damage the knife, and again, no, it did not. You see the surface of the sample after the cutting. There was no embedding. This was simply clamped, cut, and you see the section, the same area here on the TM grid. And again, if there were damage, you would see the lines here. Chitin is fairly brittle, it's not hard, no damage. The shells, the shell from clams, it was done for transmission EBSD. You see the sections on the grid, and no damage at all from this sample. Happens in biological samples these days. Epoxy researchers load sample blocks with carbon nanotubes. Carbon nanotubes are harder than diamond. They are really hard. Now you can say it's not brittle, it's hard. And there was not a big problem, not much damage, as long as the carbon nanotubes were well dispersed. If the carbon nanotubes were agglomerated, I got fairly big damage. Black opal, no damage. Mineral particles embedded in epoxy resin. Again, now you see a number of knife marks after the cutting. I imagine that in these mineral particles there were some quartz particles causing the damage. Natural molybdenite, olivine meteorite particle, and they had a little bit of damage using a 35-degree knife. I had no damage with the 45-degree diamond knife. So, damage on an inclusion in a soft matrix, yes. Damage on fairly brittle samples, rather no. We offer a free of charge sample testing service. You send me a sample, I cut some sections, and if I'm successful, I send you sections on grids and the report of my findings. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Helmut. Looks like we have one. Go ahead, Mark.
Hello, Helmut. You mentioned that Helmut just cut something for me recently, so I have two quick questions. You mentioned that the kidney stone you cut without embedding.
Yeah.
But what about the bone with the hydroxyapatite implant? Was that also without embedding?
No embedding. It was just it. It's quite some time ago, and I have not the memory whether it was embedded, but I have freed it, so there was no resin there for the cutting.
Could you say something at the Manchester RMS meeting? You mentioned to me that it is actually the embedding media interface with the sample interface that causes the trouble in the sectioning. I would be interested to hear that again.
Yes. The problem is you start in a soft material like epoxy resin, and you then end in the hard material. If the material is really solid and there is no breaking, you should not get the problem. The problem would be if once you hit the brittle material, if this breaks, if this is at the end in the edges is not perfectly homogeneous, and then it cracks, and then it causes the damage. So the interface may be the problem, but it doesn't have to be absolutely the problem.
And if I may, sorry, just very quickly, Helmut cut a beautiful, was 20 or 30 nanometer section of a chicken eggshell for me, but picking up and transferring these dry sections to grids, I guess, is a very tricky step. And I don't know if you have any wisdom for us about doing this transfer of dry sectioning to grids, mesh grids.
You have to be patient. That's it. I spend quite a lot of time for this eggshell. I'm ambitious. I want to succeed, and it's then about you need many sections and you need to try many times. It's not just happening easy. The sections, a dry section, 30 nanometers or even thinner, has no mass, and it tends to fly away. It's not easy to transfer. So it's about taking an eyelash, touching the little section, transferring to the grid. And what I often do is, since either you press, but the C-flat grids, when you press, you destroy the carbon film. So the C-flat is the carbon film I like because it's nice and flat, but it is very fragile. So you could not use any press. Also, recently I have done some pressing with the razor blade, and it was okay, because the sections which are cut dry, they are never flat. So, and when they are on the grid, they are not flat yet. So one thing I do sometimes is I gently breathe on the grid to get a little bit of humidity, and then it tends to attach at least parts of the section. It's a difficult one, I agree.
Okay, thank you.
Lee, you have a question?
Yeah, just a quick one, Helmut. With these different brittle samples, you've talked about 35-degree angle and 45-degree angle. What about cutting speed?
The eggshell of Mark, I have cut up to 100 millimeters per second. This speed, slow speed, was introduced by when epoxy resins were used in biology, because we we find that when you cut epoxy resins fast, the sections compress more and the sections get distorted. Therefore, the slow speed. All other samples, especially when you want to cut very thin, even by your body temperature, you change the thickness. Therefore, you need to section fast. So in most cases, I cut 50 millimeters per second and up.
Thank you. It's shocking, but thank you.
Han, go ahead.
Hi, Helmut. It's always
Hello, Han.
beautiful every time. So, yeah, actually, Leo was already asked my question how the speed was going. So, yeah, thanks a lot. So I don't want to waste the time. Thanks.
Okay.
All right. Looks like one more question here.
Joe?
Oh, maybe that was, okay, that hand went down. Any other, Joe, you got a question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Helmut. So I was wondering if you had any experience using this Z6040 primer to help bind certain materials to the resin to kind of prevent section pullout. Do you have any experience using that?
Yes, I do for inorganic materials. When I have to section, let's say, any coatings on glass or let's say a coating on a silicon wafer, I break off a small fragment and I treat in this primer. This improves the adhesion to the resin. I have not done it on biological material.
Okay, thank you.
But it helps. It's a 2% solution. It really helps when the sample is small and the sample tends to be pulled out during the cutting process, yes. But I have no experience on, let's say, bone or whatever.
It's just a very quick question, Tom.
Sure. Go for it, Mark.
Helmut, the section that you showed of the tooth, the enamel and the dentin, the mouse tooth, was that a dry section?
I showed the surface of this tooth after the cutting, Mark. I did not. This is not the section. I just showed the sample surface, and I didn't need to get sections in this experiment.
Okay, that was the block face, you mean?
That was only the block face. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
This would be more or less the same as with your eggshell. It tends to fall apart. It has to be cut extremely thin, and then again when it's dry, it's about mounting on the grid.